Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Safey here with Anthony Broom. Chris Ball is not able to make it today. I believe he's watching girls golf, Anthony. Is that right? Women golf. Women's golf. The LPGA, the Meyer LPGA Classic in at Blythefield Country Club. But jealous of that. I'm watching males golf right now in the U.S. Open on the second screen over here. But I guess let me start with this before we throw it over to you. We want to remind people to join us over at thewolverine.com for the best deal in America, which is 2 months of premium access for just $1 using the promo code UM1. It's a great time to get in. Michigan hosting a bunch of official visitors this month for recruiting. Tons of momentum going on there. Steve Wiltfong and EJ Holland and Zach Libby just put in an on-3 prediction just the other day for Michigan to land a top 100 recruiting target. So great time to get in over at the site. We also got football intel and much more exclusive interviews over at thewolverine.com. Like the video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to our channel as well. But AB, what's going on? We got a pretty decent show, I think, today. So a little bit excited to get into it.
Yeah, anytime that show sheet finds a way to fill itself up on June 13th, I mean, that's a huge win for
We always find
us.
a way. Yeah,
we always find a way, come hell or high water. But yeah, I mean, we are, again, I've said rounding third base on football preview. There's one lingering item on my end that needs to go in. Just waiting on another submission. But other than that, I mean, football preview completion is like the unofficial really kind of the official kickoff of the summer for us. So, we'll be out at Donovan Edwards has a camp on Saturday. I'll be out there. But after that, we kind of have, I know there's a few events here and there, but really until we go to Big Ten Media Days after next week or so, it's kind of a time to maybe sit back and maybe relax a little bit. I don't want to put any bad energy out into the world. Like, we're going to soak up all that time for what we can. But yeah, doing well today. Been good, productive, very, few weeks with football preview and a lot of other stuff going on. But yeah, good to be here.
Yes, 79 days is the official count until Michigan kicks off the season. And ticket packs, by the way, sold out quicker than ever. The 3-game ticket packs that Michigan released. And it's, as we talk about a lot, a loaded schedule. So I think people are very, very excited. $200 face value for USC and Texas. It sold out almost immediately, which is a ridiculous amount of money. But again, those are premier games. People are excited here in the great state of Michigan. And you mentioned it, AB, the 2024 Michigan Football Preview magazine that we're working on over at the Wolverine. You can get your copy now. The link is in the description. If you pre-order by the end of the day on June 17th, which is Monday, you can get $10 off if you're a subscriber to us over at thewolverine.com, or free shipping, $5 off if you are a non-subscriber at thewolverine.com. So I always say get 3, one for yourself, one for a friend, one for the archives, because you could lose yours on the beach somewhere this summer. So you want to get that right now. TheWolverineOnDemand.com. Will Johnson's on the cover, 160 pages, jam-packed of information. Again, the link is in the description here as well. Speaking of magazines, let's talk about some of the other national magazines that have come out. Looking at Lindy's to start, which has done one of these for a really long time. But I wanted to talk about the All Big Ten list that they came out with, and we see 6 Michigan players on them. They did a first team, second team, and a third team. 3 first teamers: tight end Colston Loveland, cornerback Will Johnson, defensive tackle Mason Graham. No surprise there. All 3 of those guys were also named preseason first team All-Americans. But the second team, running back Donovan Edwards, left guard Josh Preeb, and defensive tackle Kenneth Grant. No third teamers for Michigan. Having 6 total selections is tied with Penn State for the 4th most, behind Ohio State, which had 11, Iowa with 8, which is a little bit surprising, and Oregon with 7. By the way, Iowa's 4 first teamers are 2 offensive linemen, 2 linebackers. I thought that was just perfect for Iowa. And they do have some talent there, and they made the Big Ten championship game last year, so you can't totally discount what they do and should be healthier this year. But Michigan right up there near the top. I guess just your gut reaction at that. And I want to talk about maybe some guys that could have made this list as well, or that might be on the list by the end of the year. But your gut reaction looking at the guys that did make it.
Yeah, I mean, the Iowa one, those are the most Iowa type of selections there could possibly be, right? Offensive linemen, linebackers, got some really good players on that roster. I know they catch a lot of strays because of the offense, but for my money's worth, again, don't want to give too much away because you're gonna have to look at our Big Ten preview and a football preview magazine. But I think Jay Higgins, the linebacker, is one of the 10 best players in this conference. So shout out to Iowa for that. Yeah, a lot of Ohio State, a lot of Oregon. Michigan, I think right now is seen as pretty top heavy. Can't really say I argue with where, again, it's all kind of just in the eye of the beholder right now because it is something you're putting, planting a flag on in preseason prediction wise and things like that. But, for me, I think that, the obvious names for Michigan are those guys that, we're talking about as potential first rounders next year, right? Colston Loveland, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Will Johnson. Those are obvious. And I think the question that you posed is who might be some of those guys that are on this list later on in the year. I mean, I could see one of the guys at wide receiver being on an all Big Ten team. Certainly you could see it's in the range of outcomes for Donovan Edwards to kind of have a big bounce back here. And really the breakout that we've been waiting for him to have that, playing behind Blake Corum doesn't really lend itself to. So guys like that make sense. Again, if Michigan finishes in the top 2 or 3 of this conference, he is on there?
Yep. Second team.
Okay. Well, then that's me inserting.
Did you write this for Lindy's? I feel like you are Lindy's. You seem to like the list. But
I like the list. No, it was not me.
Yeah. Edwards, Josh Preeb, and KG, Kenneth Grant.
Yeah. Of those guys, Kenneth Grant, I feel like he's kind of slept on right now. Again, I don't want to make an uneducated prognostication because Lord knows I make enough of those. But, the way I don't think people realize what Michigan has at defensive tackle, and I'm not comparing, I'm comparing them to what Chris Hinton and Mozzie Smith were in that, remember the first few years of those guys, we're just waiting for them to show something, anything, because they were two pretty highly regarded guys on the recruiting trail. But Mason Graham from the jump was a starter as a freshman in base packages, obviously a full-time starter last year. Kenneth Grant, to me, you go back and you watch tape of that national championship game. He darn near single-handedly put Michael Penix in an iron lung as a sophomore. And these are guys that are still, that's an incredibly tough position to come in and play right away. So the fact that, not only is there, those two guys in particular, specifically Kenneth Grant, I think that he has a shot to win any and every award that a defensive lineman can win in this sport next year. I just think that if what we've seen these first 2 years are still like him figuring it out and the light hasn't come all the way on yet, no human should move that well at 6'3", 340 pounds or whatever he's, weighed in at ahead of this year. I just think that guy has a chance to, I think Mason Graham, I can safely say he's going to be a pretty steady NFL contributor for a long, long time. He could be one of the first 5 to 10 players taken in next spring's draft. But Kenneth Grant, if he is able to put more of those tools together and the conditioning is what it needs to be, there's no reason that he can't be in the same type of discussion that think of what Jordan Davis was coming out of Georgia. Think about what was the young man who fell to the Eagles a couple of years ago from Georgia, the other defensive tackle. I don't know why.
Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter. Guys like that. I think Kenneth Grant can be a top 10, top 15 player.
Yeah. Not
just in college football, but in next year's draft class. So to me, when you talk about upshot of those guys that are already on these lists, I think that he has a chance to be outstanding.
I talked to Kenneth Grant at the aforementioned, not in this podcast, but I feel like we've referenced it a lot, Will Johnson camp. a couple weeks ago, and I asked him about the mock drafts, and he said that he sees it. You know, he sees that he's in the first round in some of them, but he sees that he's not in the number one spot, so he knows there's still work to do. And you know, I agree with you. I was kind of thinking about this as you go through these lists, and by the way, Michigan's 3 first-team preseason All-Americans, according to Lindy, it's only All-Americans on their list. And to me, it feels like a guy like Kenneth Grant could end up there for sure. And my one gripe with these lists, as one, they do provide good podcast content in June, so we appreciate that. But a lot of it has to do with last season, and the people putting them together, you know, may not have even ever seen these guys play or known that they've seen them play, right? I mean, you maybe you watch a Michigan game, but you know, you were watching some other guys and you didn't know that number 78 was Kenneth Grant. He's a hard guy to miss, so that was a bad example. But you know what I mean. So they look at tangible things. Okay, well, this guy had 50 tackles, so I know that I can pencil him in again. He's probably going to play a lot. He's going to get their production. It's a safe bet. But as you and I were texting, as you were putting together the Big Ten preview and you rank the top 25 players in the Big Ten, when you look at a guy like Jeremiah Smith, who was the number 1 recruit in the country coming into this year, playing for Ohio State, he's a wide receiver. Like, that dude's probably going to produce immediately, especially with what Ohio State lost at receiver. And he's not showing up on any of these lists that I've seen, you know, from Lindy's or Athlon or that sort of stuff. But by the end of the year, he's probably at least going to get honorable mention or third team, that sort of thing. So, again, that's my gripe with these. But Kenneth Grant, I think, is a guy that could end up being an All-American. Certainly, I mean, you wouldn't cap him there. I would not put a ceiling on what Kenneth Grant can do this season. I think that guys, I wanted to run down a couple numbers, I guess, before we get into guys that we didn't name that could end up on these. But one, Michigan had 17 players last year that were either first, second, or third team All Big Ten by either the coaches or the media. So, you know, some of them were on the coaches, but not the media, or vice versa. So that kind of makes that number a little bit bigger there. 8 of them earned first team honors from at least one of the coaches or the media. We do have to point out that the Big Ten gets bigger with 4 new teams, including Oregon, which is really loaded heading into this year. So according to Lindy's, Oregon has 7, like we said, USC with 3 selections, UCLA with 2, Washington has 3. So that knocks out some of the guys from teams who, you know, have been in the Big Ten for a long time, like last season when Michigan had 17 guys. So the math is a little bit different. You can't look at it historically like we have, but I just figured those were numbers to throw out there in context. And of course, Michigan's team last year was probably the best in program history. So you have to point that out as well. And you can't expect that to become the norm with 17 guys on the list. But I do think there are going to be some players that you may not consider them breakout players for Michigan coming into the season, but they're going to be breakout players in the Big Ten or in the country. Jayshon Barham, Ernest Hausman. I think Makari Page certainly could be an all Big Ten safety, especially with what he's going to be asked to do this year. One of or both of Josiah Stewart or Derek Moore. I know I'm naming a lot of guys on offense, but why can't Greg Crippen be a second or third team all Big Ten guy at center? Why can't Giovanni El-Hadi be the same thing at the guard position? Why can't Tyler Morris, you know, become probably around third team, you know, with the way Michigan does things offensively? When you look at Roman Wilson last year, he was a second team all Big Ten guy, and he put up, you know, some pretty big numbers, 12 touchdowns, you know, nearly 800 yards. So I think there are a lot of guys on this Michigan team that could do that. There might be a guy or two that's listed right now that we talked about between Loveland, Graham, Johnson, Edwards, Preeb, and Grant, who don't end up on that list. I don't really see that happening for any of them individually, but you never know. But I think there's certainly room for more Michigan players to become some of the best in the conference or the country.
Absolutely. And I think something to remember too, I know the coaches vote on all Big Ten teams, and it's different in different conferences, the way that these things get voted on. But when you think about the media vote of these all Big Ten teams, a lot of the people that have the votes for this are people that are going to be watching the biggest games, and Michigan's going to play a loaded schedule where they're going to be on TV a lot. So, if a guy, let's just say Frederick Moore, has a big game against Texas, and just goes on to have a really good season, people who vote are going to go, oh, remember what Fred Moore did against Texas? And he's going to kind of be in someone's mind when they vote for these teams, whether even just as an honorable mention, all Big Ten type of guys. So, yeah, I mean, when you look at this roster, and maybe this is a conversation we have in a future show, when we look at what we learned from doing the football preview type of thing. I don't know, but to me, I think you look at the talent level at the position groups, and yes, there are a lot of question marks because you're replacing a lot, but you feel relatively good that I think in a lot of positions, like for me, it's wide receiver, running back. We'll see about the offensive line, but in some of these areas where people have maybe the most concerns, I go into this summer feeling a lot more at peace with where the talent level is. It's just full of guys that haven't really played a ton because you were playing behind, NFL players or graduate guys, things like that. So to me, I think this team I still have Ohio State, still have Oregon ahead of them, but they're not just going to be walking into these shootouts with a knife. I think that they have a lot of talent, and I think they're going to be in just about every game that they play.
I agree. Lindy's that's a last name, right? It's not somebody named Lindy. Is that correct?
I think it is someone named Lindy.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I will.
You look that up, but yeah. I was going to make the transition that let's go from Lindy to Phil Steele, the college football expert who we will talk to later on this summer, but he came out with his preseason magazine this week as well. And one of my favorite things from it each year is his unit rankings, where he ranks each position group up to 68 teams in the country, Michigan scattered all over the list, as you might imagine, especially defensively. So I'll read them here with, kind of in order of where they're ranked from top to bottom. But and by the way, quarterback was the only one that Michigan didn't have. Michigan didn't show up on his top 68, which we can talk about it. Like I'm hard pressed to believe that there are 68 teams out there in college football that wouldn't trade their quarterback situation for Michigan. It's not that bad. I think it's just very unproven. And again, like you just said, it kind of is how this goes in the preseason, but it's hard for me to imagine that there are 68 teams that are more content with where they're at the quarterback position than Michigan. But defensive line was the top spot for Michigan. They ranked number 4th in the country, number 3 in the Big Ten, behind Ohio State and Penn State. Special teams, number 5 in the country, number 1 in the Big Ten. Defensive backs, number 8 nationally, number 3 in the Big Ten. Linebackers, number 18 nationally, number 6 in the Big Ten. Running backs, number 20 in the country, number 5 in the Big Ten. Offensive line, number 56 in the country, number 7 in the Big Ten. Receivers, number 58 in the country, number 9 in the Big Ten. And then again, quarterback was the one that wasn't listed. I have some thoughts. I want to kick it to you first, though, on yours.
I'm with you on the quarterback situation. Again, I don't think anyone can sit here and argue that maybe this is even a top 25 situation right now. I don't think it is. I think if it was, then we'd be having a different conversation. But I mean, when you get to the 60s, you start talking about MAC schools that you have ahead of you. You start talking about all these group of 5 schools. I don't see that. The offensive line is interesting because, again, it's filled with a bunch of relative unknowns. We think we know what these guys are. We think we know what some of these guys can be, but you mean to tell me that a school that still has Jim Harbaugh's fingerprints all over it, the former offensive line coach, former offensive coordinator is now your head coach. You have an offensive line coach in Grant Newsome who's been in his hip pocket, for the or Moore's hip pocket for the last few years. I mean, I have a hard time believing that this is a top, not a top 50. I mean, if you, again, question marks, fine. But yeah, I think that there's a better than not chance that this is still one of the 10 best offensive lines in college football, especially when you look at the transfer portal and how many teams are kind of just easy bake ovening an offensive line. Think about what Colorado's done. Think about what a lot of these other teams have done. I just think Michigan comes in with a much more stable unit than a lot of people are giving them credit for. Again, it's filled with guys who played behind Zach Sinner and Trevor Keegan and all these guys who have been here forever. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not ready to crown them by any means, but I think that's going to be a group that's far better than what that prediction is. From there, I think my other takeaway is that, I think Michigan's linebackers are going to wind up being much higher. I think that's probably a top 10 room in the country, at least when you look at those primary two guys in Ernest Hausman and Jayshawn Barham. I think the depth's a little bit better than people are giving it credit for. Jimmy Rolder, I think, is going to be a quality player. Cole Sullivan, as a freshman, I think is going to factor in right away. The final takeaway would be that there's a lot of good defense in the Big Ten. Some good offense coming in with, the Oregons of the world, USC. Jed Fish has run good offense and will run good offense at Washington, but the defense in this conference, particularly with those top 3 or 4 teams, is pretty impressive. And that's where you start talking about, the talent level where you've really started to reach a point where, remember it used to be Big Ten would go play SEC schools in a bowl game, and just the speed, the physicality, the bodies look different. I don't see that as much anymore. And maybe the transfer portal and NIL has helped with that, but this is a really, really good top 4 or 5, maybe even 6 of the conference that we'll see this year.
Can I make a correction to the offensive line? Michigan's 36th. I wrote it down wrong. I just pulled up.
I still think that's too low.
Yeah, it feels more fair.
But that feels a little. That feels a little more of like we can have a conversation about that. Like
it is right behind. Yeah, it is right behind New Mexico State, which I don't know what they have coming back. But Penn State's 34, so they're there. Yeah, apologies on that one because I wanted to look at, and this is why I pulled it up, but then I scrolled past offensive line and realized I made a mistake. Quarterbacks, these teams are in the 60s that are ahead of Michigan, which is not ranked in the top 68. California, Wake Forest, Duke, Fresno State, Illinois, James Madison, Miami, Ohio, UCLA, Arkansas. The 50s, you have teams like Louisiana, Hawaii, North Texas, Colorado State. Again, it just doesn't feel like, there's not a lot of evidence of what Michigan's quarterbacks can do out there because they haven't played a lot, because they've been behind a guy who, 1, didn't get hurt, and 2, was fantastic and became a top 10 pick and first team all Big Ten player. So you don't have the evidence there. I know Jack Tuttle has had some playing time in his career, but it's just, again, I think they're going to finish a lot higher here. And Phil Steele does do, to his credit, he doesn't just throw out the preseason rankings for these units. He does do postseason rankings on his website as well. So, and I think he ranks them throughout the season. So it's decent accountability there. And I think, Phil overall does a great job. And I can't wait to talk to him later this summer and ask about some of these specifics here on what he sees as well. But that's
no disrespect to the Godfather, by the way. Like he
True.
Is as good as it gets when it comes to this stuff. But
he fits more things on a page. Like I'm zooming in here like to 400%. I mean, we fit a lot on a page in our magazine, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah. My favorite thing about Phil Steele is the abbreviations that are like exclusive only to Phil Steele. Like
True.
That's
no apostrophe.
Shout out to Phil Steele.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's great. By the way, answering an earlier trivia question, Lindy Sports was founded by a man named Lindy Davis. So it is a first name Lindy.
A man. Okay. Shout out to Lindy Davis. So
yes, sir.
Okay. Well,
again,
Phil, Lindy, thank you. Appreciate both of you for your information. And I'm sure we'll pull more on the podcast here and the website from some of these preseason predictions as we go along, because I think they're interesting to look at. And one, I think, some people discount a lot of it, but at the very least, it's kind of a baseline of what's out there and how people are viewing Michigan and other teams. And you can certainly disagree with them, as we have here, and still respect what they're doing. So another guy I respect, we go from Lindy to Phil to Andy Staples, our coworker at On3. So even if I didn't respect Andy, I would say I did, but I truly do. He does a great job. Andy Staples On3 every single morning, weekdays at 8 a.m. I just gave him a free plug, so I wouldn't have done that if I didn't like him either. But he came out with his projected 12-team playoff this week, and they discussed it. I want to discuss a couple different angles of it. First off, it just would be an awesome playoff. I'll read off the seeds here. It's up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. But number 1 seed's Ohio State, taking on the 4 or not taking on the 4 seed Kansas State. So I'll just read them in order. Then I'm thinking old school 14 playoff. 2 seeds Georgia, 3 seeds Florida State, 4 seed is Kansas State. The 5 is Alabama. Oregon's the 6. Texas is the 7. Michigan is the 8. Notre Dame is the 9. Those 2 teams would play in the first round. Ole Miss is the 10. Tennessee is the 11. And Boise State is the 12. Let's just start with this. In Michigan, Notre Dame, first round of the playoffs.
That'd be in Ann Arbor, by the way. First rounds are on-campus sites.
Yes.
Oh, I would love that so much.
It would be incredible. The only thing I want to see Notre Dame host a Southern team, and I want to see Michigan host a Southern team if they both get in the playoff this year, because them coming to the Midwest in December would be awesome, because we always talk about Michigan goes, they play in the Orange Bowl, they play against Florida State, they go to the Orange Bowl, they play against Georgia. It feels like there are no advantages for Northern teams in this sport, but now in December, that's going to happen sometimes. It's also going to be, there could be a case, you look at Alabama here hosting Boise State. I mean, you get in as Boise State, I think you're pretty content with that in the 5-12 game, but that's going to be a tough task for you. And I guess it would have been a tough task no matter what. There are still advantages for the Southern teams when they're hosting a Northern team in some of these games, but it's probably not the same advantage, as it would be if Michigan's hosting Ole Miss or something like that, because Michigan players know what 80-degree weather looks like. Like, it's 80 degrees here right now. But a lot of Ole Miss players may not know what 25-degree weather looks like with snow while playing football. And, when the Michigan players are more ready for that, like they've proven to be over the years, rain, sleet, snow, Michigan's been a really good team in the weather lately. Then I think that's a factor. But that's a little bit of a tangent there. Michigan Notre Dame would be awesome.
Yeah, just on the seeding, I mean, I think it's, oftentimes it's, you think NFL playoffs. It's like, oh, well, we need to win this game because if you're the Lions, you'd rather host than go to Green Bay. Like, it's always kind of teams in, the same sort of pot. And there's a lot of indoor teams now. But getting that higher seed, getting a top 8 seed, I mean, you want a top 4 seed because you're going to get that bye right to the quarterfinals. You're going to be right there in the mix. You get that extra week of rest, which is critical that time of year. But you got to get one of the top 8 seeds in this tournament, or else you could be Tennessee and have to go play a game in Madison, Wisconsin, or you could be or Eugene, Oregon. Yeah, I mean, when you look at this, I mean, this is going to be so much fun. And I know there are people that kind of bemoaning the end of college football as we know it. What I'm staring at on the screen, to me, that is so much more fun than watching a Pop-Tart get devoured on a field after the game.
That's still going to happen, by the way. The Pop-Tart.
I know. I mean, we can have both things, right? Michigan Notre Dame in a playoff game would be phenomenal. I would be so down for that. Really in either location, but specifically to not have to travel would be great. For our coverage purposes.
And a higher chance of traveling the next week or 2 weeks later.
True. Yeah. What I find interesting, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, Andy is kind of setting up for like a Will Howard versus Kansas State type thing, which I think is fascinating, given the fact that, Will Howard from Kansas State. Maybe. I mean, again, they have 5 quarterbacks.
This is what I want to get into, AB. So you said it. And for people that don't have it up on the screen, again, Kansas State here was the 4 seed. Ohio State is the number 1. And you said you got to get one of those top 4 seeds. And I tend to agree. Like, you do want a top 4 seed. And we have to remember, and should have noted at the top, that, and Andy Staples did a great show this week because he explained this whole format again to people who did forget once the 12-team playoff got approved. And I almost don't blame people for forgetting because so much has happened in college sports recently. But the top 4 seeds and those first-round buys go to teams, the top 4 conference champions, top 4 ranked conference champions. So he's not predicting that Kansas State is going to be ranked number 4. He's actually predicting that Kansas State might be ranked number 11. They're the only Big 12 team in this field right now. And so that begs this question, that would you rather be the 5 seed than the 4 seed? Because the 5 seed gets to host. And again, you do have to play another game. So that makes it tough. And probably the answer for me is no, you would not rather be the 5 seed. But it's quite the argument, because hear me out. Would you rather be the 5 than the 2 or the 3 or even the 4 potentially? If you're Alabama here, you host Boise State. And then, and remember, Boise State might be the 25th best team in the country. They're the at-large out of the group of 5. The highest-ranked group of 5 team gets in. So you're this 5 seed here. You're probably hosting a group of 5 opponent. And then if you win that, you get the number you get to play the 4, right? And then after that, in the 4 seed, again, may be the number 10 team in the country. So you have an easier path potentially to the semifinals. It's just a theory. And I will predict this right now. I think a number 5 seed is going to win the national championship in the first 3 years of this format. Last year, it would have been Florida State. If they would have been healthy, they would have had a shot, but Georgia was the 6. Like, those teams at 5 and 6 are, potentially just as good as some of these other teams. And they may have an easier path if things shake out a certain way.
Well, and also they might be pissed off too, because they are the 5 team. They are the 6 team. So you head into a home game in that first round full of piss and vinegar, and you're Alabama. You're going to beat the hell out of Boise State after losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game. And you're not going to be afraid of Kansas State. You're going to blow the brakes off of them too. And if that's the scenario that plays out, all of a sudden, let's just say you're Alabama and you play at Ohio State in the semifinal of the college football playoff. You're hot. You've been, in the mix here for a couple weeks. You've had a chance to hit your stride. Postseason's different. So to me, I think there's merit to what you're saying there. Certainly. I think that those 5 and those 6 seeds, it's going to be interesting to see what the data on that is early on. But again, we're talking about the what would have been the first team left out of the college football playoff, the second team left out of the college football playoff, now being the team that makes a run in this 12-team playoff. Certainly, if Georgia was in that spot that Alabama or Oregon is in this projection last year, that might be a team that no one wants to see, despite being a 5 seed, a 6 seed. So to me, I think there's a lot of merit to that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. How many years before we get a 5 seed that wins it all, do you think? I think somewhere in this first 3 years, because think of it, it's and Andy lays it out perfectly there. So really what he's saying by putting Georgia 2 and Alabama 5 is that Alabama loses what I would imagine would be a somewhat close game in the SEC championship game. And then, and by the way, these SEC teams this year, they go back to Atlanta if they make the national title game, which is an advantage for Georgia and any of these teams. But all he's saying there is that Alabama probably loses the close game to Georgia, which keeps them at 5. And we've seen it before. When Georgia won the national title in 2021, they lost the SEC championship game, but they were the better team and ended up proving it in the national title game.
Is it crazy to think that it could happen as early as this year?
No,
right? It's
not at all.
So when that happens, come back June 13th, 2024. I won't take credit for it. Clayton laid out the scenario first, but it was said here. Really, when you look at college football now, it seems like a couple of years ago, if you weren't Clemson and Alabama, or you weren't Georgia and Clemson, if you weren't one of those top 2 or 3 teams, there was kind of a gap between them and everybody else. Now, I think that 5 different teams, 6 different teams have a realistic shot at this thing. So, which is not a hot take really, because it's an expanded field. But, to me, I think Georgia is probably the closest thing to that this year, given that they have Carson Beck coming. I think they probably have the best quarterback in college football returning. I think they have the best roster in college football returning. But other than that, I think it's everyone else is just kind of in the same pot. And Michigan, it's not crazy to think they could kind of be in that conversation too. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I'm just excited for it, man. I want this video game so we could play this stuff out.
Then we could really experiment. Yeah, how often does the 5 seed win? That sort of thing. In our football preview magazine, we did the college football experts roundtable where I talked to 4 different national writers: Tom Fornelli, Bill Bender, Steve Lasan, and Andy Staples. And all 4 of them had the same national champion. Who do you think it was?
Georgia.
Yeah, it was Georgia. Georgia over Ohio State, I think, was all 4. Which is, it's crazy that there's that much of a consensus, but it probably won't be those 2 teams. Now it probably will be that I said that, but it's kind of interesting. Those are definitely the teams at the top right now that people are looking at. But Andy does have Ohio State as the number 1 seed in the projected 12-team playoff. So thank you to Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Andy Staples. Last topic of the show. There's a movement going on, Anthony, in this country. I've noticed it. You look around the country, you start to see, okay, decades ago, a lot of the population moved south. Decades before that, a lot of the population moved to the west. And now I'm seeing a lot of people from Ohio move to the great state of Michigan. And before you get angry about that, to the listeners out there, because, we don't necessarily want them coming up here. I think we do want some of them probably coming up here, at least Michigan fans do. Roddy Gale Jr., going from Ohio State to the University of Michigan on Dusty May's basketball team. Tony Alford, 9 years at Ohio State as the running backs coach, was the assistant head coach. He comes to Michigan now as the new running backs coach and run game coordinator. And another, Erin Dunston, who was Ohio State's senior assistant athletic director, assistant athletic director for football recruiting and events. She joins the University of Michigan staff now as the director of operations. Anthony, there's a movement going on in this country. Like I said, Ohio to Michigan, it's a new pipeline.
Well, so much about our current socioeconomic situation is that you want to better yourself and you want to put yourself in this, in a situation where, 1, you can make a lot of money, and 2, your hard work is appreciated. And lo and behold, I mean, it's been the off season of Ohio State to Michigan defectees. And now some of the people down there, including, again, I don't have a whole lot of love in my heart for really other outlets in general, but Barstool Sports, there was a blogger over there that just had a complete and total meltdown over the amount of Ohio State talent that's been heading to Michigan.
You know his name? Ohio's Tate.
What is it? Ohio's Tate?
His name's Tate, and it's Ohio's Tate.
Oh,
so that guy had a meltdown. It's the most predictable thing ever.
And you're in it, by the way. There's a cameo of your Twitter or your X account in his blog. So it's pretty much, and again, I poke fun. I think that the way he feels is probably the way a lot of Ohio State fans feel at the moment, where it's one of those, well, if they weren't willing to stick around here, then, they're not loyal and they'll turn on Michigan, whatever. But didn't we kind of do this on the flip side of it a couple of years ago when Greg Madison goes to Columbus and Al Washington goes to Columbus? So this has happened before. Again, I think that credit to Sharon Moore, credit to Michigan. I mean, that they are identifying talent, and whether it's from Ohio State, I mean, it's twisting the knife when it comes from Ohio State. But, to me, again, it's you just want to hire good people and get them in place. And the thing about Ohio State is that they've been very successful there. So, there are a lot of, when people, they just kind of bemoan and throw, as these people go out the door, they throw tomatoes at them. But, Tony Alford has been a big part in why Ohio State has been successful on the field. Erin Dunston has been a very big part of why they've been successful, on the recruiting trail and some of the other things that they've done. So to me, I mean, it's a conviction of hiring good people away and selling them on what your vision is. And I don't think it's anything petty. I don't think these people at Ohio State are leaving because they don't feel appreciated. I think it really reflects on the appreciation and the monetary sort of stamp that Michigan is putting on bringing those people here. So for as much of a meltdown as there's been, we have seen this on both sides of the rivalry before. again, it's just people are going to react the way that they react, and I continue to like the moves that Sharon and his staff have made to kind of, a lot of what they're doing operationally is the same, but there's been an expansion of the recruiting department, and they've backfilled some roles in their front office, so to speak. So again, it's when you lose good people, you have to bring good people in, and maybe again, this is nothing on the people that left, but sometimes you have to shoot for even bigger people when you have that type of talent that leaves. So, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know a ton about what Erin Dunston brings to the position. I know her sister has been part of the women's basketball team at Michigan, so there is a tie there. But again, it's on June 12th. What a storyline, what a meltdown to see, and it's again all this praise. There's been nothing but praise for Ohio State all offseason, but it sticks in their craw like no other that their people have decided to move north of the state line, which it's just objectively a better place to live. So
it is
objectively.
And the summer is a great time to come on up here and enjoy it for sure. A couple things. One, it's probably not a devastating loss for Ohio State, but two, she definitely did a good job. Mike Pantoni, their general manager of player personnel, called her a rock star when she was helping with their recruiting. Like I said, she was the assistant athletic director for football recruiting and events. She spent 3 seasons before that, before being promoted as their director of on-campus recruiting. I think she'll probably help out there for Michigan as well. Kaylee Johnson, Will Johnson's older sister, and really beyond that, I think just a really good staff member is handling that for Michigan right now, but she can certainly help, having experience in a role like that. And by the way, Kaylee Johnson comes from Michigan State, so Michigan just taking all the rivals, people there. And she worked at Kansas and Purdue before that. You mentioned her sister Jillian is Michigan's second all-time leading rebounder with 862 rebounds. She was on the All Big Ten All Defensive team. She's now an assistant coach, entering her second season with the program. So the sisters teaming up at the University of Michigan as well. And I know Jillian put out a tweet, a kind of a cryptic tweet that she said she was very excited, had a great day the other day. I don't think she could say why yet because the hire is not official. But certainly I think that's a really cool thing for those two to work together. And she'll work closely with Scott Goldschmidt, who was the director of operations, now senior assistant athletic director for football ops. In reminder that she replaces Christina DeRider as the director of ops. She spent a couple months in that role before leaving for the Los Angeles Chargers. So to rattle off several facts there, because I know we jumped the gun and just started talking about Ohio State to Michigan pipeline. But it is interesting. You bring up, this did happen, like you said, with Greg Madison and Al Washington going from Michigan to Ohio State just before Ryan Day's first season. Now Sharon Moore's first year. Michigan's kind of in the driver's seat in the Big Ten, and he's poaching from there. So it's just probably a coincidence, certainly, but there's kind of a shift, I think, in just the way. And by the way, everyone thought at that point going into 2019 that Michigan was going to take over the Big Ten. They were picked to win the Big Ten that year. It didn't work out. Ohio State stayed on top and won 2 straight Big Ten titles in 19 and 20. Everyone's kind of predicting Ohio State now to take over in the Big Ten again, and Michigan is saying we're still here. And I guess their own staff members are saying to a certain extent that Michigan's still here. We might want to go work for them.
There are a lot of parallels there, right? I mean, that 2019, Michigan gets destroyed by Ohio State in 2018, and Urban Meyer retires, and people are like, yes, finally, the wicked wizard of Ohio State football is gone. And to a certain extent, I think that there are now Ohio State fans that will go to their graves saying that there's no way that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan could have possibly beaten them the last 3 years without cheating. So there's like that aspect of it now. But I'm telling you, if those people down there just think that because Jim Harbaugh left, because they lost all these guys, that there's just going to be a switch that gets flipped and we're bringing everyone back and the band's back together, we're running it back. I'm telling you, man, there are a lot more parallels to that 2019 Michigan team with this Ohio State group than I think some people realize. And again, do I expect this Ohio State team to be better than 9-3? Yeah, I do. But just be careful. Like, there's a lot of talk coming from down there. I mean, I feel like every tweet I have has at least one or two asterisk tweets attached to it, cheaters tweets attached to it. Like, just a lot of talk and a lot of hubris coming from down there, despite the last 3 years being what they are. So again, I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. But that's what we've.
Last topic: would the 2024 Ohio State team beat Michigan's national championship team? Please discuss. That was a real podcast topic on the Cleveland.com podcast a couple weeks ago.
It would not be appropriate for me to just put my hand to my mouth and make a fart noise into the microphone, but that's what I think about that type of discourse. That's not even June 13 discourse. That is like galaxy brain, I'm bored, we're not very creative discourse. So,
hey, I respect the hustle of the podcaster world out there, but
listen, the fact that we're talking about it, I mean, it did, that's the first time we've ever talked about a podcast from that outlet before. So
that's true. We don't do this where I don't like to criticize, but that seemed like a little bit of a stretch. And like, how do you even know this team hasn't taken the field yet? But we don't need to go into into that. I haven't actually even listened to it, so I don't know the full.
And I won't
around it, but
I won't do that either.
I don't really care. That's going to be our show for today. Happy Father's Day to the fathers out there. We do have a special at thewolverine.com right now. We mentioned it at the top. The promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. And if you're also listening, you're a member at thewolverine.com. You want to get a membership for your dad, or at least have him try it out. He can get 2 months for just $1. Again, promo code UM1. Head to thewolverineondemand.com or the link in the description here to pre-order your copy of the 160-page Michigan Football Preview magazine at a discount. Do so before Monday night, June 17th, so you can get that discount. Up to $10 off there. Like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see everyone on Monday.